Yeah. Ours is the fourth. And that's who, like when our cases or any of the cases here in Bexar County get appealed, it goes to the fourth court of appeals. And you can imagine how big Texas is and how many counties there are in Texas, and they're divided into, different circuits, okay, or different districts. All right, U.S. District Courts. Legal actions that may involve an interest and a right of the government in the United States are tried in federal courts. All other litigation that is less than international in scope is tried in the state court system. District courts are the trial courts of the federal courts and have original jurisdiction exclusive of the state courts in all criminal offenses against the United States. They have broad jurisdiction over civil actions arising under the U.S. Constitution and federal laws. They also have original jurisdiction of civil actions exceeding $10,000 that may arise under the Constitution, laws, or treaties of the United States. Special federal courts. Special federal courts are called legislative courts. These courts include the Claims Court, the Court of International Trade, the Tax Court, and so on. These courts have special jurisdiction as implied by the name of the court. Individual state courts. Each state has the authority to create its own courts, and these are hardly uniform. Most state court systems consist of a Supreme Court, a court of last resort, an intermediate appellate court, usually called the Court of Appeals, trial courts of regional jurisdiction where suits are commenced, and inferior or lower courts such as probate courts, also called surrogate courts, and other specialized courts.
Because there's 14
In
judicial
Texas?
circuits in Texas. But
So-
the 1st and 14th share concurrent jurisdiction.
Share concurrent
They
jurisdiction.
share, I guess they share to equalize the docket
Yeah.
based on where.
Yeah.
I'll write that down.
Okay, state trial courts. Oh, I'm sorry. All but 5 states use the designation Supreme Court for their court of last resort. In Maine and Massachusetts, the highest courts is called the Supreme Judicial Court. In New York and Maryland, it is called the Court of Appeals, and in West Virginia, the Supreme Court of Appeals. Okay. State trial courts. This tier of trial courts hears important matters. Felony trials in which the defendant may be sentenced to a long prison term, and civil suits that usually involve $1,000. Such courts are generally located at any of the county seats. In some states, several counties share a single court or judge who normally sits in one county and then visit the other counties for short periods of each year. Judges of these courts are always lawyers and normally serve for relatively long terms. All jury trials in state courts are heard in these courts, although most cases are heard by the judge alone and are settled out of court. These superior courts are the highest state courts of its original jurisdiction. In some states, these courts are called circuit courts, district courts, or courts of common pleas. I don't think we really need to know what they call them in New York. Okay, state lower courts. Lower courts include those proceedings are directly subject to appeal review by a higher court, such as a municipal court, justice of the peace court, small claims courts, city courts, traffic courts, police courts, justice courts, magistrate courts, recorders courts, village courts, mayor's courts, town courts, and so on. All lower courts have limited jurisdiction. In criminal cases, they are generally restricted to misdemeanor, preliminary hearings, or inquiries in felony cases. In civil actions, their jurisdiction is over cases involving small amounts of money. Generally, lower courts are not courts of record, but in many jurisdictions, examining trials are fully reported verbatim to bind defendants over to the superior court. So it's all lower courts, like my court, okay? We're there to hear only Child Protective Services cases, and that's what my judge hears. We hear some other stuff. Presiding will send us some stuff to where we hear, stuff, and he can rule on that stuff. If they agree, we agree that the associate judge can hear it, then he can hear it. Whether they come from motions for continuances or default judgment, child support, uncontested divorces, stuff like that, okay? So they can hear stuff as long as it's agreed to. So that's the makeup of the courts right there. So you have, all of the lower courts, which is the state lower courts, which is all of those, various police courts, magistrate courts, blah, blah, blah. Then you have county court courts, and then court of claims, surrogate, family court. So all of those are together, and then you have the Court of Appeals. Then you have the Supreme Court. Okay? You may want to mark that.
So family court, court of claims, all of those three are considered special court?
What do you mean?
Like, I'm just confused.
Those are state courts.
So why are these separated and not all in one box together?
Well, they're just showing you the tier because they're different. County court cases are different from, regular civil cases, and it has to do with the money amount that you can hear like in a county court, as opposed to a civil district court. So county court can only hear up to a certain amount of money that it involves. And then if it's over that amount of money, then you have to go to a district court and file a civil district action against someone. Make sense?
I think so.
You may want to mark that one. Okay?
I mean, mark the whole tier.
Yeah. Just important to know. Any questions about that?
What was the difference between the Court of Appeals versus the lower Supreme Court of Appeals in the top box?
Between the Court of Appeals and the lower,
It has Supreme Court, Supreme Judicial Court, Court of Appeals, and Supreme Court of Appeals.
I think it said they're all
it's just the
called
different names, like in different
states.
regions. So like in New York, it's called the Supreme District Court or, whatever. So, but they're all the same. It's just, they're named different in different regions.
So all those four in that top tier are the same thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just the different names for the different states. So if you go to New York, it's gonna be called, what was it called?
Supreme Court. Supreme Judicial. Just Supreme Court.
Court of Appeals. So New York and Maryland, it is called the.
The Supreme Judicial Court.
Yeah.
In Maine and Massachusetts, it's the Supreme Judicial Court. In New York and Maryland, it's the Court of Appeals. And in Virginia, it's Supreme Court of Appeals. And it all means the same thing.
Those are all the U.S. Supreme Court.
No. The U.S. Supreme Court is totally different. There's only one U.S. Supreme Court.
So after each state goes to whatever they call it, Supreme Court, Court of Appeals,
Yeah.
then they go to the U.S.
Yeah,
So then above this tier should be the U.S.
the U.S. Supreme Court,
U.S.
United
Judicial
States Supreme
Circuit?
Court. Huh?
The 12 state judicial, not state, there's 12 judicial circuits, so then would it go to the U.S. Court of Appeals and then the Supreme Court?
So it's the U.S. Supreme Court is the highest. Then it's the Court of Appeals in the 12 circuits. You see it? And it's on page 307.
Yeah. So this appeals from state court would be all this over here on 35.2 figure, fits into that box, the last box on 35.1, the federal court structure. That was my question
What's
when I
that?
was reading. When you look on page 308, you look at the figure 35.2.
Yeah.
So this is a state structure, and that basically the whole structure
Mhm.
would fit in the appeals from state courts.
And that's federal. On 35.1 is the
Okay.
federal.
So if you would want to go from the Supreme Court in Texas, you would then make an appeal from that bottom box and then go up from there to the court, the 12th Circuit. Maybe it's a bad question, I don't know how to phrase it, but basically, like, what's the jump? Do you go from Texas, let's say like in Texas, you go to the Texas Supreme Court, could you then try and appeal to the 12 circuits for the federal?
Mhm. Yeah, I think so. I think so. I think I get what you're saying.
Can you explain that table? I just cannot understand the 35.1.
Point one, that's the
Yeah.
federal. That's the federal, this is the federal court structure, okay? So you have appeals from state courts. Then if you see, it kind of goes up to the Court of Appeals in the 12 circuits.
What is tax court and court of?
That's a totally different court. Totally different.
Would this be used for the criminal, or any,
Yeah, any federal criminal, I mean, it could be civil too, it could be a civil action too. As long as it involves federal law.
So you ended up with the gay marriage, even though that was considered, isn't that technically was a civil suit?
Yeah, in a state court, I believe.
And it went up
I think
to
it started in a
court.
state court.
So I think what you can do is you can say, some things you can do is civil if, like, one state rules differently than your state, you
Mhm.
say which is right, you can take that to the Supreme Court if it's different.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think one of the next ones going up, they were saying is gonna be the marijuana because it's legal in certain states, but federally it's still considered illegal, even though that state has ruled it to be legal in that state, so they were trying to get it to go to the Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and it's kind of confusing. It's confusing. So I wouldn't worry about it a ton. I mean, you just kind of need to know the structure. But I mean, once you get out,
are these questions that they ask you on the state?
There was some in this.
I don't know that it's that in depth.
It was in the packet.
It was.
Not,
We were studying some questions that it's from the RMR,
Yeah.
and they're really challenging.
actually.
About what?
It's like I've got to study, I didn't bring any of them with me.
I have it.
Guys,
You
write
need
them
to
write
see
them
it.
down. Write them
Well,
down
yeah, I bought
because
the book.
yeah.
And I just shared it because there's several of us studying for it.
And it had to do with the courts, the different courts.
I only did 55 questions. There's
55
like
questions?
170 something questions in there. And they were pretty tough. I couldn't remember.
Yeah, like what is the reporter's minimum response, not, this isn't a one, but like, it included questions. What is the reporter's minimum response to a request to certify questions on deposition? Include the request in the reporter's certificate, prepare an affidavit extracting the certified questions, index the questions requested for certification, use a standard deposition certificate.
I'd mark that. And that's that reporter that's coming.
There's a
Because
lot
we went
on
over
there.
certified
That's what I'm
questions.
saying.
Yeah, we
Mark
went over
them now.
certified questions.
Write them on a
Book.
different sheet of paper.
I already did.
Don't, what was that one? It was
we went over
on
certified-
page 505. Write them down. Just write them down. This way you have them. If she knows, great, and if she doesn't, I guarantee she's gonna find out the answer, and then
We
she'll
went
get
over
back with me and let
certified-
me know for sure,
Yeah,
but,
because we went over certified questions in the book, but it wasn't that detailed.
yeah. I know. So,
And we should ask them, because this The questions are pretty tough, I thought
Yeah.
they were, because it is an RMR.
Yeah.
So I wonder.
So it's a national test.
Yeah, it's an
I wonder if
NCRA,
they
which is
would-
Yeah.
different from TCRA.
I mean, not that, I mean, we'll eventually need to know that stuff. Like,
Mhm.
we're studying for the CSR,
Yeah.
so it's like, do we
Are these
even
questions?
dabble in that?
Yeah.
And
Is
overwhelm
the
ourselves?
CSR as in-depth as this RMR question? Anyway.
Any questions about those? Courts?
All of them.
Yeah.
Still did it.
Huh?
I spent 30 minutes on each page at home, it's all marked up and highlighted, and I still don't.
They're just.
What don't you get?
separate courts.
There was one, I found a really good illustration online, let me see if I can pull it up, that had it all, and it made sense, because I'm a visual learner, if
Yeah.
I can see it, like.
What,
it was
I mean,
the
what
huge-
don't you get?
Like, on figure 35.1, that box that says territorial district courts, what, like, does this table compare at all to 35.2, or are they totally
They're
separate?
totally different.
Well, they're different because these are like state courts.
versus
The
federal.
35.2 is state courts. The 35.1 is just federal courts. Federal courts are totally different than state courts. Completely different.
So, because I was trying to fit this table to like.
No,
this
don't, you're not
corresponds to
fitting the
that.
table 35.2 into 35.1. Totally different tables. Totally different.
So what are these little boxes above, or the ones that say territorial district courts, federal and local jurisdiction, are those states?
Yeah, they're probably state courts. Territorial district courts, federal, yeah,
But they're on the federal level.
yeah.
Okay, so where do we fall under? I guess I'm just as confused, sorry. I'm not making things.
Guys, this is federal. It's not what I do.
There's a
So if you come down to the courthouse, it has nothing to do with that.
Okay.
You have to go to the federal courthouse for it to do with that.
Okay,
You know, and you know what? What I may do is talk to a buddy of mine and see if he'll come speak too. And I'll get him to speak
one of the
either
federal
Wednesday
ones.
and he's a federal. He's a federal.
What's the name of, very nice, she has long blonde hair, she works at the federal, tall, and I keep forgetting her name, but I see her at the BCCRA meeting, so she
Oh,
works in the
Yeah.
federal.
She
Christine.
was sitting next to Brittany.
Yeah. And I can probably get her to come. But I have, a buddy of mine, well, it's Glenn's son, Chris.
Oh.
And he's been there long enough. I mean, he's gonna know everything. And he's come and talked at the Eclipse. You know, when I taught Eclipse for the first time, he came and tried to explain how to do the auto indexing. And even this guy's a guru at Eclipse. But I mean, that's for another day. But he does, so I'll get one of those to come. They'll either come next week or they'll come on Monday. And I'll have one of them here. One of them will come and speak. One of them will do it. So I need to make myself a note.
There's certain distinctions between what's heard in federal and what's heard in the state. I don't know, what was your question? Let me see if I can help you.
I guess if you have anything with taxes, if you're, I guess, let's say IRS is taking you to court, I guess it fall under the tax court?
I think there's a whole thing for that, like tax evasion, tax,
So that would fall under here. Is that right?
I think so.
So I guess where I'm kind of lost is, where do we fit into these two?
This one fit over here, because this is all federal. If you, let's say you go through the whole state process, you start from the bottom and you go to the state Supreme Court.
So you're gonna start
Then
here.
you're gonna start here and you say, well, I want to go see if I can appeal to the 12th Circuit for the federal.
So it goes this way.
Yes.
What do you say the box that says appeals from state courts?
I think you're gonna go, if you follow the line, it goes up to the 12 judicial circuit courts.
So Court of this is just Court of International Trade, advanced with international stuff. Then you'll go.
Okay. I just texted her to see if she would come and speak or whatever, so. But I'll get one of them. One of them, I know 4 of them over there, so one of them will come. So within either next week, either next Wednesday or that following Monday, somebody's gonna come and
Ask
speak
them
about it.
What designates a federal case versus your,
Guys, get your questions together now. You know, about all of this courts, what makes up a federal case, what they have to do, marking exhibits, all of that stuff is totally different. You know, even their pay is different than what we get paid. Everything is different over there. You know, so get your questions together, okay?
It's more like, the pay is more like the same, isn't it? Maybe a little bit more.
they get paid
or a
different.
lot more.
Less.
Oh,
Less?
Like federal?
Yeah, federal is less.
because
Why?
they're not subject as much
I don't know.
to
We'll
the-
talk about it when we get off the thing or
Everyone's like,
whatever.
"I'm not
But
working
yeah,
for
it's
federal."
less. It's considerably less.
So
So-
can my question just be, can they explain this table to me?
Yeah. I'd probably hone in a little bit better than that. Explain that table 35.1. Come on, you know? Well,
There's some
when a
good-
case starts here, where it goes here, how it goes here, you know what I'm saying?
But I don't even understand where to start, I just, that table just.
It starts at the bottom, Slick. So, I mean, a case starts, so it's gonna be in a state, a federal state court. Okay? So you start at the very bottom, so it just starts as a federal case, and then it moves up to the Court of Appeals in the 12 circuits. So it's just the Court of Appeals, and then it goes to the United States Supreme Court. So you see where it makes that little turn and goes above? So it has nothing to do with the territorial district courts.
Okay, so then what is that?
That's something totally different. Territorial district courts is a totally different court. Federal courts and local jurisdiction in Guam, Virgin Islands. And then tax court is something totally different than that. But they all go up to the Court of Appeals in the 12 circuits. So none of those have anything to do with each other. So that doesn't have anything to do with the territorial district court. The state court doesn't have anything to do with the territorial district court or the tax court. They're all separate, but that's where they go. So then it goes up to the Court of Appeals to the 12 circuits, and then it goes to the Supreme Court. Does that make any sense?
It does, I guess my question would be the territorial district courts, what is that? Because it goes to tax court, but that's not state. You know, because you have the states down here at the bottom.
Yeah.
They have their little thing. So if